Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm away from the news forum, but I'm also still connected to the news forum where all voices matter. Well, today we have with us Meseret Haileyesus. She is the director of the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. And our topic is economic abuse of women, how it happens, and some policy solutions. Welcome to the program today, Meseret.
Thank you so much, Tony, for having me.
It's my pleasure. First of all, can you just give maybe a brief definition of what you mean by economic abuse?
So economic abuse is just a form of domestic violence, which is accompanied by non-domestic violence like, physical, sexual, and also emotional abuse. So when you see the definition specifically, it's all about controlling someone's finance and resources, not to leave the abusive relationship. That's a concept of economic abuse. Unfortunately, this form of violence is hidden, underreported, and under-recognized form of violence. And also one of the critical reasons not to leave women in the abusive situation. So that's the definition and then the scope of economic abuse.
Could you maybe give an example or two of how this happens?
Okay, yes. So usually in this situation, domestic partner or either who abuse women interfere access women for her finance and then assisting even all economic assets under their name. And sometimes also we have seen that like perpetrators prohibiting victims using their credit card, writing check, accessing even marital accounts, and preventing victim even to advance, her economic empowerment and asset. And plus, sometimes they also sabotage their employment by making the women, by to miss her work. And also the other thing is also we have seen many times, perpetrator deliberately dragging a divorce paper, abandon her not to access, child support, restricting her even her credit card, sometimes abandoning basic needs like food, clothes, and transportation. Even recently, we have seen that women who's in disability, some of them are, of course, on wheelchair. And what happened is perpetrator even deliberately taking out the batteries of the wheelchair so that woman, she cannot move, she cannot go, she cannot talk, she cannot access her economic resource. So it's a very comprehensive form of violence. So at the end of the day, woman, she will have a challenge and then restriction to access her economy. So this is the most critical reason not women to leave this abusive situation. And also when you see the statistics, women who experience domestic violence, 85% of them is also experience economic abuse. One of the number one reason is finance and economies. In some culture, it's a taboo to talk. And plus family violence also, it layers the situation and exacerbates. So it's a very, very kind of terrible and even heartbreaking situation when a woman passes through this journey.
Yes, and as you have mentioned, it's a combination of different styles of abuse. It's not just economic abuse. There's psychological and there's physical as well in most cases. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, it's a combination, but usually accompanied by the emotional one. That's what we have seen from our day-to-day work. Yeah.
Right. And how? Tell us a little bit more about how this is a barrier for women and girls who undergo this economic abuse.
Yeah, just simply like if a woman want to leave that situation, first you need to finance, right? You should have money for your transportation. You should have to make sure also you have your bank account and credit. But there is a situation when they have a joint bank account. So perpetrators deliberately, they don't allow women to have that thing. And the other challenges, of course, some women also, they have bad credit. Some perpetrator deliberately, they renew their, per credit. So that's also another barrier for a woman. So if of course, in Ontario, for example, if you want to have an apartment, definitely you should have a good credit. You should have a cosigner. You should have first and last month's deposit. So this situation, it's really, really great for a woman not to live that abusive situation. And the other challenge is the mental health trauma. So many women, those who have been through this, they are always on survival mode. So sometimes, they don't have nothing even to eat. That's what we have seen in our situation right now, even in pandemic, of course. So that's also another layer of a barrier. And
Right.
accessing also yes, sorry.
Yeah, I want to get to the pandemic. We're going to take a brief break for commercials. So hold that thought. We'll go right back to you. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Meseret Haileyesus. She is the representative of and the director of the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. Meseret, we were just about to get into the biggest thing that has had an impact on economic abuse recently, which is COVID-19. So tell us a little bit about how COVID-19 has made these situations more precarious and worse.
Yes, COVID-19, has exacerbated the condition of domestic violence in Canada and across the globe, which is by trapping victims at home and also stopping them, even not to get help because of the situation, like, for example, the social isolation. That's what we have seen. And also the pandemic in the meantime is allowing to flourish economic abuse because women are staying at home. There's a social isolation out there. The abuser is still around. So that's really, really affected and exacerbated. And of course, we also did a number of research during the pandemic, even from our data. We have seen that during pandemic in Canada, specifically in Ottawa and Ottawa region, 80% of victims stated that their abuser displayed more controlling and manipulative behavior during COVID-19. And in addition to that, also 93% of women have experienced it. Economic abuse, which is perpetuator were holding their finance and including basic need, for example, like food, clothes, and other necessities. And also 92% of victims also, they were refused not to go back to the workforce even after the pandemic. So when you see even the situation, definitely COVID pandemic, it just duplicate and then multiply the impacts of domestic violence across Canada and across the globe.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a combination of the isolation, the lockdowns, but also the economic opportunities are less during and post-pandemic. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, correct.
Okay. Is there now, though, and I guess it's part of your job, really, but is there a greater awareness of economic abuse and its cost to society now? Is this part of what you're working on?
Yes, yeah. So my organization, the Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment, we are the only organization right now advocating and also raising extensively about this issue across Canada. So unfortunately, many women, they don't know even the term economic and financial abuse. That's what we have seen. And also there is a lack of policy and then support for survivors of gender-based violence. So in terms of the awareness, yeah, definitely the awareness is very small. Still we are aggressively working hard to reach from coast to coast in Canada. So we also raised awareness for the past 3 years, specifically even to have a national day to raise awareness on economic abuse. So in Canada, November 26th is a National Economic Abuse Awareness Day. So this awareness day enables policymakers, advocates, survivors to come together and to talk about their issues and their economic barriers. So that's what right now we are doing, on the agency.
Wonderful stuff. And I also understand you recently made a presentation to the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I had a chance to share our policy recommendation for the status of women, representative from the parliament. So it was a very good opportunity for us to share our policy recommendation. So we come up with certain policy recommendations specifically that, affect, women to rebuild her life specifically after domestic violence. So one of our recommendations is, of course, to include this issue on the National Action Plan, and also to allocate more funding and support and raise awareness for survivors of gender-based violence, because the economic aspect is very critical. We need to come up with some solution because women, they need inclusive, trauma-informed, and sustainable economic empowerment platform after they leave that abusive situation. And also there was a call to action for private sectors like banks. Our bank, they need to have financial equity program among the Canadian banks. That's our call. And also, in addition to that, other business, for example, essential service providers like telecom company, including Hydros, including also like Rogers Bell. There's a lot of agencies, they need to be part of this movement. So yeah, that was a call to action. And also, we raise also an issue with the housing as well. As you know, housing is not affordable, but for survivors, it's not only affordability, but accessibility is the most critical aspect. So hopefully, you will see what will happen. And we're very happy to be part of that conversation. And yeah, that's it.
Well, that sounds very interesting and quite successful. We're going to continue our conversation, though. We've got 2 segments to go with our guest. Please stay with us. We've got a couple of commercial breaks coming up, but we'll continue our conversation about economic abuse on women after the break. Please stay with us. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. My guest is Meseret Haileyesus. She is the director of the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. And Meseret, I just wanted to talk a little bit more. You mentioned financial institutions. They're very central. You've mentioned some other stakeholders too, like phone companies and so on. But these are the essential building blocks of having any independence in our society, right? That's why you're focusing in on them and how they can help. Is that right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes. So from our recent study, from our research, we found that financial institutions, including bank, credit unions, and other private stakeholders, they were not helpful for survivors of gender-based violence. That's our study, actually, we found even in the pandemic. So we know that the Canadian banks, they have an amazing program for seniors financial abuse out there and also for many marginalized community. So specifically, when you come to gender-based violence, I know the issue is very complex, but still our women have a challenge and struggle to access some of the service out there. So right now, what we do in the organization, we established a national task force. We invited a lot of bank leaders and experts just to discuss about this issue and to come up with some solution. So one of the solutions we propose is like to introduce such program in the bank. So that would be very important, because what we have seen when a woman flee abusive situation, they don't call to the police right away. They don't call to family members. They don't flee to the shelter. So what they do is they want to make sure if they have a good amount of money, sometimes they talk to their bank. So if we could train like frontline employees in the bank, so women, they could have a safe and then trauma-informed customer service, so that like that relationship and trust will be built. So that's how we meet right now. So we are asking the banks to come up with some program. We have expertise and information and everything. And the other thing is also we are asking Canadian Bank to have a product for these women. Imagine I'm in shelter, I may have a visa, I may not work for 2-3 months. If I don't pay the minimum payment for 2 months, definitely my bank account will be suspended. So imagine if I want to use an Uber, definitely I need my credit card. So unfortunately, some women, they were not even eligible to have their credit card. So that really keeps women not to use their economic resources. If you want to go back to school, definitely you have to pay the registration fee. Everything is on credit card. So we are asking the bank if they could have some program, because we have seen in Australia and in United Kingdom, they have amazing program for those women stay in shelter. So that's how our advocacy at this point. And the other aspect is, of course, is like the banks also, they should come up with some program for specific those women. At the end of the day, they are their customers. Some women, they may have a mortgage, if we have like a healthy woman, a healthy family, those who contribute to the economy, at the end of the day, the bank would also be profitable. So we had a call to action last year, definitely will continue, but we have seen that a lot of banks also, they recognize this issue. Yes, it's an issue, but we need more action at this point.
Right. So the reaction is they're just starting to get a handle on it, and you'd like to see some action. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. We need those action. Of course, we also develop different policy recommendation, including for Financial Consumer Agency Canada. So we want to see that policy recommendation translated into action. So that's our call to action for all Canadian banks,
Right. And the same with phone companies, I think you were mentioning too.
Yeah, for the phone companies, still we are working on how we could approach them. And then, if they could have a special plan, sustainable, special and equitable plan for women. So that's also a huge part of this work. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you're going to have independence, you do need a smartphone in today's society. That's basically your conclusion, right?
Yes, yeah, correct. And also not only the smartphone accessing, but the plan. Sometimes I may not have money to pay, like, my internet. Of course, there is a discount plan out there. I know some companies also, they show their solidarity and support in the pandemic, which is fantastic, but it has to be continuous and sustainable for all women across Canada.
Right. And are you making some progress on that front yet?
Not yet. So that's our 2020 survey plan. So still we're kind of collecting information and, resources. Unfortunately, one of our challenges, we don't have any data on economic abuse. We're just working right now. Hopefully, like next year, we'll come up with some program. And then, of course, amazing, data. That's how we envision, yeah.
We're going to continue our discussion with Meseret Haileyesus on economic abuse of women in our society. Very interesting discussion, very practical solutions that Meseret and her organization are suggesting as well. Please stay with us. We've got one more segment to go. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Meseret Haileyesus. She is the director of the Canadian Centre for Female Women Empowerment. Meseret, you talked just very briefly about getting some inspiration or some ideas from other jurisdictions like the United Kingdom, I think you mentioned. Tell us a little bit more about that. What sort of ideas are you finding in some other places?
Yeah, so what we have seen from United Kingdom and Australia, including New Zealand and few countries, out there, they started, of course, this movement 10 years ago. So we have seen that there is a huge improvement, which is survivors of gender-based violence. They have a knowledge on financial and economic abuse. Frontline service provider, including lawyers, shelters, and financial institutions. Also, they have tools and resources to mitigate the impact of economic, abuse. And in addition to that, there are programs and services that enable women to generate, income, and also enable to go back to school and then to sustain their income. So there is various program and best practice out there. And then right now we are kind of exploring what are the best experience, out there. And then finally, our plan is just to adopt that best experience in the Canadian context. So even recently, they have a new law in United Kingdom that specifically helps, survivors of gender-based violence to recover from economic abuse. So those kind of initiative, it's really, really a light for many survivors in Canada.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of it centers around training. Is that right?
Yeah, it's training. It's training, awareness raising, programs, and also support in terms of grants. Grant for business, grant to go back to school. And also even in shelters, they have a specific program that address the impact of this because some women, they don't have financial literacy. So their financial literacy program is a very inclusive and trauma-informed that really created a lot of opportunity for many women out there.
Are you finding, is that one of the issues though, that women are not aware of some of their options? Is that part of what you have to do as well?
Yes, yeah. So what we have seen many women, even they don't know the term financial and economic abuse. Of course, some women, they know financial abuse, but they associate always with seniors' financial abuse. Of course, seniors is also part of this issue. So there is a huge gap in understanding because in many cultures, finance is owned by men. So they kind of understand and normalize that kind of power imbalance. I think that's also another thing. And also, as you know, finance is a taboo in many family members. So that really enables women not to have access to information about the situation. So knowledge is a very important thing, because many survivors, after they leave that situation, they will say, aha, yes, I've been in this situation. I didn't know even it was abuse, It seems like normal. So yeah, that's how right now we are working. But the awareness is not only for survivors, but for policymakers as well. They have to understand this issue. They have to understand the survivors of gender-based violence economic struggle, including housing in Canada, mental health, the justice system. It's not accessible for many women, So it's kind of like a layered issue and then very complex to address, but still the awareness is the most critical and then the most important work right now we are doing.
Yeah, it probably hasn't helped matters that inflation is so high and that housing prices are so high as well, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's almost an added layer of difficulty for you and your organization and the women that you're helping.
Yes, yeah. Gender-based violence or domestic violence, there is a lot of socioeconomic line women they have to go through because of the situation. So poverty is one of the most, prominent, issue women they face every day. So now the inflation, the pandemic, the trauma, being isolated, the stigma, you can name it. And affordability is also one of the issue, but the systemic issue out there, as I mentioned earlier, to have a housing, you should have even a cosigner. You should have a deposit. Many women, they are not doing that because they don't have money at all in the beginning. So this is also another critical barrier for a woman to have that. And the cost of living, as you know, it's very kind of, affect everyone. But those people who are already on poverty, it just trigger even their trauma because of the situation while we are here. Yeah.
I want to thank you, Meseret, for your presentation. Very, very interesting, and certainly wish you well in your endeavors in this very important area. Thanks for coming on the program.
Okay, thank you so much for having me again.
Very interesting discussion with Meseret on economic abuse of women in our society and what can be done about it. Obviously, she's got a lot of work going on, and thanks for being part of the discussion today.